Ladies and gentlemen, welcome yet once again to another episode of It's Me, speaking to you. I'm, as always, your ever-faithful host, Mr. Jeffrey Wilson, coming to you live and direct from the gateway to the west. And today, we are taking off. We're taking off to the Great White North, ladies and gentlemen. We're up in the... Where's my man Ed? He is in Windsor, Ontario, Canada, ladies and gentlemen. This guy has a very successful podcast which focuses on the sport of mixed martial arts, UFC, just general sports media in general. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the show. He is the host of Kobe's Korner, Mr. Kobe K. How are you, my friend?
Jeffrey, I'm doing great, my brother. Thank you for that fantastic introduction. I live in Windsor, Ontario, which is also known as the butthole of Canada. So I am very grateful to be here today and looking forward to chopping it up with you.
Yeah, man. I've been following you for quite a bit, man. I've been doing my podcast. It'll be coming up here in about a month. It'll be about a year. And you were definitely one of the ones that I was kind of looking at who's doing what in the world of kind of mixed martial arts and sports in general. One of my first guests was UFC Hall of Famer Pat Miletich. I've had him on several times, and Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, just several MMA fight promoters. And so, I was just wondering, what got you into that, man? It seems like podcasts are a little bit of everywhere. When did the bug bite you, and why specifically MMA?
Well, for me, I competed in the sport of mixed martial arts. I had a great amateur run. I was on the up and up. I was 8-2. And then I hit a bit of a wall personally, and I went pro. And at that time, I wasn't able to do the things I needed to do to be successful. So I ultimately threw my opportunity away, and I only have myself to blame for that. But I was treated for an anxiety disorder, sort of got things together, and had this understanding of the sport and this love for it that essentially became a love-hate relationship because of the opportunity I threw away. And I decided to come back and do this thing as an analyst. I've been a color commentator for a professional basketball team here in Canada for 3 years. Sort of had to get to the gab, able to break things down, and just gave it a shot. And it's still a relatively new sport. Like you said, just about every other dude has a podcast. But I think what separates us is those that are really good at it stick out, and those are the ones that are going to find those greater opportunities down the road to make money, because ultimately I want to get paid to do this. So I've just sort of been riding it on for about a year now. Things are going great, and just kind of remain grateful, work hard, and try to achieve this goal one step at a time.
Yeah, I mean, and you're definitely, your breakdown and your analytics is pretty precise, man. You go really deep, and I didn't know. I was wondering, had you competed before? So that's very interesting, because you obviously speak from a very informative standpoint, almost in having not knowing that you had competed before. I was like, man, this guy knows his shit pretty well, man. But yeah, if you guys anybody want to check it out, Kobe's Korner, you can find that on YouTube. Obviously, we'll shout out some links here towards the end. Were you gonna say something?
No, go ahead.
So recently, obviously, there's several, I'm going to pick your brain on several different cards, and I apologize. You asked me prior to this to shoot you kind of the stuff I want to talk about, but you've already broken down on your shows anyway, so nothing I'm going to say is too huge of a curveball. UFC 200 just went down. Thoughts on that? A lot of people say it was a bit anticlimactic, quite a bit of drama going into it. What do you think about UFC 200?
I think, sadly, it was marred by the use of drugs. And, USADA is here to stay. And Dana White told us it was going to get worse before it got better. And we're sort of going through a rough patch right now. You had, obviously, John Jones, Tis Dirty, and then, of course, Brock Lesnar, who was essentially replacing John Jones. Yeah. I mean, ultimately, when you put that much hype behind a card, it's going to be very, very tough to deliver. But we did see a healthy Cain Velasquez back, looking like he will challenge once again in the heavyweight division. So I thought the card delivered. Did it live up to expectations? No, it did not. I don't think it was ever going to. I think UFC 202 is going to do a better number in terms of the pay-per-view buys. But again, marred by the use of drugs in the sport. And sadly, that is what UFC 200 is going to be remembered by.
Well, and even leading up to it, man, like you said, Dana did say it was going to get worse before it got better. I mean, even BJ Penn got hit with something in his attempted comeback, and I believe it was Chad Mendez just got flagged for something the other day. I mean, I guess they're working out whether this, whatever, if it was illegal or whatever it was. But, I mean, it's just getting popped. You're just seeing more of these cats getting popped more and more. And that's kind of another thing I was going to ask you about the hits with the steroids, the sale, the stuff that went on with Ariel Helwani, just the general kind of, from my perception, man, a bit of bad PR over the last several months, and then the sale going down. What do you think about the brand? I guess I can ask you now. I mean, the brand of the UFC, obviously it's going to be around a while, but you have your up-and-comers like Bellator and stuff like that. Do you think, and even the Reebok deal is just so many fighters are upset about it. What do you think these hits are doing to the brand of the UFC? And do you see a big tide shift in some of these competitors like Bellator? You have a lot of these cats jumping ship because of the money and stuff like that. What are your thoughts on the brands taking hits and the future?
It's crazy because I think at one point in time in the media, you didn't want bad press. But now with bad press comes attention. And with social media being a global thing that we essentially live with every day, it's just more exposure for the UFC. I mean, ideally, they don't want all of this negative PR stuff, but with the company selling, I mean, they're looking now at global growth. You had these 3 investor groups that bought it for $4+ billion. Company in the red, they paid $2 million, I think, in 2001. You want to talk about a return on an investment. 2015 was a banner year for the UFC, doing over $500 million, where Conor McGregor was at the peak of his popularity. So if that's your building block, if you can sit down and you were going to sell your organization and you say, look at these numbers, look at what we did in 2015, I mean, that's got to be a huge chip. And people forget, and I'm going to say this lawsuit has not gone away. Right. The antitrust lawsuit against the UFC. So in the event of the sale, it was a good time for them to skate out, because if they lose that case, it is going to be like the Titanic sinking. We're going to see a massive change in the landscape of the UFC, the potential of a fighters union brewing, and then with the stars, because they make all of their money off those big names. Ronda Rousey, nowhere to be found. John Jones, at this point, you cannot count that in 2 years he will be back. Because sadly, with people that have drug and alcohol problems, there's a potential that he could be dead or in jail. I hope the man comes back and does great things. But that's just the reality of the situation. Conor McGregor is 1 loss, maybe 2 away from losing all of his star power. So this was a great time for them to sell this thing. And that's the goal of every business. You buy, you turn a profit, and when you're swimming in money, you light the cigar and you ride off into the sunset. So the UFC, in terms of Lorenzo Fertitta, who is the company's CEO, of course, Dana White, these guys did their job, they made their money, and they got out, in my opinion, partly because of the things that you're talking about, because there's a lot of bad press. There's a lot of fires to put out. Got out at just the right time.
Yeah, I think so. Dana, I think his chunk was like $300+ million or something like that. I mean, he's sitting pretty good, man.
He is, and I believe that this deal was a long time in the making. And if you go back to Ariel Helwani's interview that he did about getting his credentials pulled, he was telling us that this was happening. The UFC came out and said, we are not for sale. Right. This is absolutely false. And you can't blame them, because could you imagine the firestorm in the media if they gave you even the inkling that they were going to sell? They would have ran with the story. So he chose to tell us that it was false. And in that program, Ariel Helwani was telling us, look, I'm not talking about the potential sale. I'm not talking about this meeting. And that was him firing one across the bow of Dana White, and also telling the UFC, look, I'm not putting all of your business out there. I could be talking about this. And after I listened to that, I knew 110% that it was going to be sold. And I think that was a telltale sign that this thing was going down. And it did. And here we are today, a new group of owners. Like I said, global growth on the horizon. The TV deal has done really, really well. Fox is very, very happy. And that ends in, I think, 2018. Then they're going to be looking at getting ESPN on board. CBS will bid. There's going to be a bidding war for the next TV network to get a hold of this thing. So I think that also was a big selling point, that when this TV deal's up, I mean, this thing is absolutely going to explode in terms of how they're putting it out there to the world.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's just a matter of time, and that'll be very interesting. I'll be anxious to see how this brand, like you said, how the landscape changes with this new ownership, and even if it does. Getting into, in talking about that, building this brand, I guess this next phase of this, it's interesting to see I've seen the last several years, the stars, the depth of the roster for me isn't really there. You got the belt changing hands big time in like the women's bantamweight division. Like you don't see a lot of champions sticking around for a long, long time. Excuse me. I spoke with Pat Miletich about this, and even Wonder Boy. You brought up Conor McGregor, and talking about stars. What are your thoughts on this Conor McGregor effect that is kind of pervading the UFC now, and this being able to talk your way into fights? You know what I mean? This kind of WWE effect, Chael Sonnen losing to John Jones or losing to Anderson Silva and then fighting for John Jones, light heavyweight title, and even the stuff with McGregor. What are your thoughts on that? The middleweight division, Jacare Souza just getting dissed, man. That's been my boy for a hot minute, and he's just getting dissed again just because, the fans want this fight, which I get. You got to walk that fine balance. What are your thoughts on that? The lack of the depth of this roster, not a lot of stars moving into this next phase that you were talking about, and this kind of usurping the rankings and this McGregor effect of the business.
Well, the rankings, from what I know of them, my friend, are all smoke and mirrors. I also agree that 2-3 in his last five, 45-year-old Dan Henderson, the legend that he is in no position for a title shot. But that is a good example of what this thing is about. And it's always been about making dollars, and what makes dollars makes sense to them. And Conor McGregor makes them a whole lot of money. Look at 2015 once again. $500 million. The objective of the company is to make money. They're never going to steer in the other direction. And I will tell you this, don't expect, in my opinion, too much of a change in brand. And I'm going to tell you why. They were never going to sell this thing without Dana White staying aboard. Could you imagine three investment companies purchasing the UFC for $4 billion plus and going in blindfolded? So I believe that part of the deal was that they keep Dana White, that he works in this capacity, because if you get cut a check for $360 million, where is your motivation to get up and go to work? I see 2 points. One, you love what you do, or two, you're transitioning out. So the new deal, 5 years, he keeps a small percentage. He's looking at making, if the UFC does $200 million a year, and we're going to say that's in the low end, he's going to make $18 million. That's going to be Dana White's paycheck for the year. That's Roger Goodell money. So in the next 5 years, I expect him to transition out, somebody else to come in, but this thing would not have survived with both the CEO and the president stepping down. With Dana White still there, don't expect too many big changes in terms of the stuff that the fans don't like. I do expect to see more revenue streams, and that's a good thing because that makes more money. We're going to see the UFC go global. We're not going to see Reebok go away. We're not going to see fighter pay change unless they sit down. I don't think any of that stuff's really going to change in the near future. I think that ideally it's going to be the exposure through streaming and television. While Dana White's here, this thing is going to run very close to similar as it did.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, if it isn't broke, there really, no need to fix it. And and Dana White, man, he is a beast. I mean, you could talk whatever you want about him, his personality or whatever, but the dude is obviously successful, and he's definitely good at what he does, and he loves what he does, man. And that's clear.
Yeah, he's done a fantastic job. I mean, I don't agree with all of his decisions, but who am I? Being the boss and being successful means that you got to get up in the morning like he's done and put out fires, and you got to make tough decisions that have the business in the forefront. If they only cared about the athletes, which would ideally be an amazing thing, they wouldn't have sold for $4 billion. That's the sad reality of business.
Yeah, that's definitely it's definitely telling right there. That's definitely a good point. What are your thoughts on Bellator? Do you think that they are? I mean, obviously it's kind of somewhat of a, I wouldn't say a freak show, but it's a little bit of a freak show at times. Do you see? I mean, like I said, you got a lot of cats jumping ship from the UFC over there. Not too huge names yet, but I mean, you're still seeing some pretty big names. Benson Henderson went over, unfortunately caught an L in this first fight. But what are your thoughts on Bellator as a I guess a rival to the UFC, or just another competing MMA company?
I think Dana White's batting 1,000. Every single fighter that's gone over has been on the slide, and they were sort of at the tail ends of their careers, as illustrious as they may have been. Now, if Rory McDonald goes over, he's somebody that we believe still has a lot left in the tank. That will be a substantial loss on the roster. I don't think they really allow that to happen. But the UFC bought up most of the competition. I mean, look at Fight Pass. You can go on there. Titan FC is a top 5. Victory, you can watch all of these outside organizations. Bellator has a never-ending well of money with Viacom, and they're surviving, and they've done a good job considering. But I don't think they ever touch the UFC. They don't have the business contacts or the kind of TV deals, I think, that are looming for the UFC. Obviously, the star power. They can definitely survive, but there's no doubt about it, in my opinion, that the UFC is without a shadow of a doubt the top dog, unless we go back to the lawsuit. We have to wait and see what happens there, because it was not thrown out of court. The UFC motioned to get rid of it, and the judge allowed the process to continue. That means that there is a potential that the UFC loses that case. And if it does, that's when we have a whole different conversation.
Yeah, the impact of that could be very huge. Like you said, I think I saw one of your videos the other day, and you were talking about, that's always a big deal, professional wrestling or MMA, unionizing, because these guys, get fucked over, pardon my language, so often. And Mark Hunt is one of the cats leading the charge, if you will, on that talk of possibly unionizing the fighters. What are your thoughts on that?
It's absolutely the time. The change in ownership, this is the very small window that the fighters have. And again, you can't blame Dana White, because at any point in time, these guys can do this. And the NFL and the NBA have laid the groundwork. They've given the blueprint. In 1954, the NFL players went to strike because they wanted the right to play with clean uniforms. These sports organizations and leagues have been through this. So the path is cut. They just have to follow suit. Unfortunately, the UFC takes very, very good care of their stars, and those guys get pay-per-view points. Those guys make millions of dollars. They keep them happy. And in order for this to take place, this big transition, they all have to come aboard. It has to be a brotherhood and a sisterhood. They have to be all in. It needs to be everybody. And I think some fans are missing the point with Mark Hunt. They're looking at, well, he's not a big enough star. It isn't about the fans' popularity of the person to lead the charge. It's about the fighters respecting the person leading the charge. This man was tortured as a child. He's been a fighter his whole life. He's been a survivor. He's 42 years old. He's on the decline in terms of his career. I think, he's obviously putting in some good work still, but Conor McGregor is not going to lead and run a union.
Right.
Mark Hunt is respected amongst the fighters, and all it's going to take is one person to stand up and start blocking. And if everybody comes together and sits down together, they can do this. This can happen. There's a revenue split right now going down of 90-10. It is absolutely deplorable. They are making boatloads of money. They might as well be printing it.
Right.
Now, I understand the UFC's perspective. They're going to do what they're going to do. These fighters need an organization like the Teamsters to come in and show them the process, because they're all under contract, and they need everybody to sit down together. And if they do that, this can be done. But that window is not going to be open for long.
Right. Well, and another huge aspect is the medical coverage, man. I mean, that's just something they don't have. And in this game, it's something that's so, imperative while you're fighting, and definitely after you're fighting, that, the effects of a fight career, that stuff lingers forever, man. And you definitely need good medical coverage.
Well, to the UFC's credit, I mean, they do pay for surgeries. They took care of all Dominic Cruz's bills for the knee surgeries, the rehabs, but they're taking care of you to get you back in there to make money and compete. They're not concerned, with the aftermath, with the concussions that we don't know what that's going to look like in 20 years. I suffered 4. My doctor told me I could be looking at some serious problems when I'm older. We don't know what that's going to look like. So in the instance that the UFC takes care of their guys in the moment while they're competing, absolutely. But like you said, down the road, there is nothing. There is no stability. There's no pension. There's no health care for family. And again, this is why a players union would serve them so well in this moment.
Well, and we will see. That's definitely a big deal, man. And if that happens, especially, that lawsuit, I mean, I'll be anxious to see. When is that supposed to be resolved? Do we know? The lawsuit?
You know what? There hasn't been a ton of information released about it. I believe John Fitch dropped out. There's 3 fighters remaining. Don't quote me on that with John Fitch. I'm not sure. I continue to look for information, but it's scarce. It is in the works and alive and well for the plaintiffs.
Fitch is still fighting for a World Series of Fighting, isn't he?
I believe so. It's just another good example, and one that decided he was going to stand together with those guys. And I mean, if you're Mark Hunt and you get out of that contract, maybe he's the guy that joins them.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll
definitely make this work, to take on the UFC.
And I know you will be on top of it, and I will, drop whatever news I can as things develop. As it relates to stuff a little bit more recent, I mean, obviously that's still a recent story, but like coming up, actually, that last weekend we had Holly Holm, man, dropped a big defeat to Valentina. I don't know how to pronounce her last name, Shevchenko.
You got it.
Probably massacred that, but man, very interesting. Even watching her lose to Misha Tate, I wasn't surprised because that's the way you beat somebody like Holly Holm. But to see that Valentina, I'll just say her first name, kind of do that again, like replicate that same MO, that same battle plan, and really dominated Holly. I was really shocked. What are your thoughts on that big loss this weekend from Holly?
Well, a lot of people were. You're not the only one. And Daniel Cormier, Brian Stan, some of the bigger analysts, everybody picked Holly. To me, it was no surprise that Valentina Shevchenko was able to upset Holly Holm. It wasn't a big upset if you really did the homework. Now,
right.
In the end, I'm going to be honest with you, I picked Holly Holm because I thought that her experience in the championship rounds would have carried her, with Valentina Shevchenko only having 2 fights in the UFC. But what she did was execute. It was very similar to that of Holly Holm in Ronda Rousey, in that she came in poised and ready, controlled, and executed a game plan. I don't think I've seen that kind of timing out of a fighter in a very, very long time. She found a home for a check right hook early in the first round. She went back to that well. Holly could not figure it out. Like I said, the timing was just spectacular. And again, we see Holly forced into leading. So now the question mark is she effective when she has to be first? And she's a striker, so she can't afford just to sit back and wait. The other opponent's not engaging. She's not interested in grappling, so that forces her forward. Ronda Rousey charged and marched on after her and paid dearly against a counter-striker. Misha Tate sort of laid the blueprint, and then Shevchenko followed suit. They had Holly studied and down to a science. Holly looked a lot slower. She looked emotionally out of sorts. You have to wonder, maybe the John Jones drama seeped into that gym. You just never know. But that Holly Holm that we've seen was one that I don't think that's going to wear a belt again. That's no disrespect. This woman's been an absolute warrior. Almost 50 professional boxing fights. She came into the UFC 10-0, I believe. She had never lost. She's 34, but there's a lot of miles on those tires, and you never know when Father Time's going to come between camps, tap you on the shoulder. We don't see that.
Yeah.
Where the speed goes, the reflexes go, the timing goes. Holly Holm very well could be at the end of her road. That, or Valentina Shevchenko, is that good.
And I think you had one of your videos, Holly Holm, the title of it was Exposed or Shevchenko That Good? I think it's a mix of the two. Like you said, it's all of those kind of inquantifiable factors. Holly's a little older, been around a long time, and Shevchenko, I don't know how old she is, but, she fought an excellent fight. So I think it's a mix of the two, but that's an interesting weight division, man. That belt's now off of Misha Tate. Now Amanda Nunes has it, and I think she could probably hold on to that for a while. I don't know. She has to get her cardio up. Like, her thing is she starts strong, but, not so good in the later rounds. But I'll be anxious to see. I know Ronda's probably sitting back there like, what the hell, man? The chick I lost to's lost twice, and, Misa's lost. Like, what's going on in my division here?
Yeah, I think it speaks to how good and how dominant Ronda Rousey was. And let me first say this. I'm not a fan of Ronda Rousey. I never have been, but I've always respected the talent. She held it down. She destroyed, steamrolled, cleaned that division out inside of one round. Also defeated Tate twice, who was most recently, a current UFC bantamweight champion. And now they're playing hot potato. And this is going on because we've seen this influx or explosion of talent with the women. It's so new that we're seeing all these world-class strikers transition into MMA, find footwork, find some takedown defense, and their stand-up so good that they're able to survive, learn, and then ultimately get really good at the sport of mixed martial arts. So all of this talent with the women is coming in. You're seeing all these new fighters and names pop up. It's exploding. It's becoming one of the best divisions out there. Very exciting. So I think Nunes is going to have her work cut out for her.
Without a doubt. And I think that's, that's a good point, man, the explosion and the huge influx of these women into these divisions. But even kind of like I spoke of earlier, like the hot potato with these belts, man, we got a new lightweight champion. We got a new middleweight champion. Like nobody's having the run anymore. I think some of that, it is some of these guys are just getting older, and some of these younger guys are that good that nobody can really, put on a consistent run of title, title defenses.
You make a great point. 2016 has been the year of the upset. I've never seen this inside the sport. You have Demetrius Johnson, Joanna Jędrzejczyk, and Robbie Lawler, who is fighting in 5 days, I believe, have been the only champions to retain their belts. So there are question marks. Why is this happening? Is it because USADA's in the house? Maybe that's part of it. Is it because everybody's getting better? That could be part of it. Is it maybe guys are getting older, like you said? Definitely. So we don't know, but there's definitely something going on here in terms of the upsets and nobody being able to hold on to the world titles. And it goes back to say and pay respect to how good fighters like Anderson Silva, George St. Pierre, Ronda Rousey, with the successful title defenses. That's going to be Chuck Liddell, if you want to go way back. And I apologize, those pioneers have started it all. If you want to talk about greatness in the sport, that is going to be a defining factor.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think it's necessarily any one thing. I think it's kind of all of these different factors playing into kind of this, like you said, the hot potato. I think everybody's so damn good, man. Kids are, like my 8-year-old daughter's in jiu-jitsu. Like everybody's learning this stuff now, and it's become such a huge phenomenon. Well, obviously not everybody can be world-class athletes, but, we're just seeing a lot more of them. You had mentioned Robbie Lawler. Obviously, he's coming up. I'm beyond a huge fan of Robbie Lawler. Obviously, Pat Miletich Fighting System, always down for the Miletich Fighting System. Coming up, 201, Robbie Lawler and Tyrone Woodley, man. I'm a big fan of Tyrone Woodley, too. But Robbie, like I told Pat, Robbie scares me, dude. Robbie, he is ruthless. Like, the dude is just built for freaking war. And he's just, when I talked to Pat a year ago, I think Robbie had just won the belt, and I was just astounded. Robbie's been around for so freaking long. So many different organizations. Back in the day, Pride, Strikeforce. He's now the UFC champion, welterweight champion. That just says so freaking much to be on that elite level still. And Tyrone Woodley has his hands full, man. What are your thoughts on Robbie Lawler and Tyrone Woodley coming up this weekend?
Well, I'm going to first echo your sentiments exactly. His first fight was in 2001, I believe. And what's made him so interesting and so special is that he came in this natural-born killer, this fighter, this dude that's down to bang and go to war. He's going to get in the trenches and fight. But he lacked technique. He lacked speed. So he was able to become great later on. Usually it's the opposite. Now he's excelling in the later years. It's just unbelievable, the change in Robbie Lawler, and a lot of that goes back to the strength and conditioning he's doing at American Top Team. It's just unbelievable. If you take a look at the opponents he's faced, Condit, McDonald twice, Hendricks, Brown, Ellenberger, Koscheck, Larkin, Kennedy, Ronaldo, Souza, Jake Shields, Matt Lindland, the list goes on. This dude has fought probably the toughest list of opponents that I have ever seen. The wars have been unbelievable. He leaves it all in the cage. But the question mark for me is what is going to happen and when is the odometer going to run out? When are the tires going to be worn too thin? You can't continue that type of fighting, absorbing that type of punishment forever. I hope I'm wrong. I love Robbie Lawler, but I think at some point here it's going to come to a close. He's had 2 successful title defenses. I'll watch him fight over any other welterweight in the division right now. I absolutely love his game. For me, again, it's the question mark of what's left in the tank.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I'm a huge fan, so I mean, obviously I have a clear bias, but, I mean, throughout the history of fighting, we've just seen this to be the case. The human body just cannot withstand too many wars like that. So your thoughts on that fight, Tyrone and him? Do you think what are your chances? I think I don't know. I think Robbie's going to knock him out, me personally, but I think Tyrone's chance is to wrestle him down. What are your thoughts on that fight? Who takes that one?
Well, we'll talk first real quick about what skills Woodley brings to the cage, because I think it's important to recognize the threats. And I think that with him, you have a guy that's explosive and strong and really fast, probably the fastest athlete in the welterweight division. And he was a great wrestler, like you said, and he transitioned that shot into a right hand. So he is able to explode into a very dangerous strike in that right hand, and he can most definitely knock anybody out if it lands. He has struggled in other areas. He has struggled with cardio. There's a lactic acid buildup in that kind of physique that he carries, and he didn't look that great in his last fight. And, for me, you're fighting I'm going to say Robbie Lawler, maybe one of the greatest ever in terms of the wars, the excitement, what he brings to the cage. And I don't see a lot of areas where Woodley's going to be stronger than Robbie Lawler. For me, this all depends on if the odometers run out.
Which Robbie shows up exactly.
If he's got something left in the tank, I don't see Tyrone Woodley beating him. I really don't, not based on looking at the skill sets. Robbie Lawler, much more technical than he's given credit for. He does a great job keeping his lead leg to the outside, which creates a lane. He's also fighting an orthodox guy, which opens up the power side. He's able to deliver that devastating straight left or that body kick. So I like the matchup. It's just the tread on the tires. And if Robbie Lawler has it left in the tank, I think without a shadow of a doubt, he wins this fight.
Very, very interesting, and I agree. I definitely agree. I'm just waiting. I'm not waiting for it, but like you said, he's been in so many wars. It's like I'm just hoping that same Robbie we all know and love shows up, and if he does, it's a wrap for Tyrone. Speaking about that division, another kind of person who's been skipped over in the rankings, who I had on my show a couple times, Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. He's clearly going to get the winner of this fight. What are your thoughts on that matchup between either of those two, either him or Stephen Wonderboy and Robbie, or Stephen Wonderboy and Tyrone? And your thoughts on Wonderboy in general?
I think he's the best welterweight in the division. He's turning into one of the best fighters in the world. I picked him against Rory McDonald, and boy, did he deliver. This guy is a riddle that nobody's been able to solve, and he continues to be a problem for anybody in the welterweight division. If Robbie Lawler gets past Tyrone Woodley, and you could never count Robbie Lawler out of any fight, and I don't want to go on record to sound like I'm doing that, but there's, in my opinion, no doubt about it, that Stephen Wonderboy Thompson is going to wear that strap. His time is coming. He is a spectacular, dynamic, and elusive fighter that brings so much to the cage. And like I said, I think he wears gold in the very near future.
What speaking about that McDonald fight, and I mean, you sound like you're very analytical with moment by moment. Towards the end of that fight, Rory was finding a home for that left hook, and I don't know if you remember that. And Wonderboy ate a couple of strong ones, and I'm like, damn, he's got a chin. Granted, that wasn't first round McDonald doing that, but he was when they were both staying inside, right in front of each other towards the end of that fight. Rory was, he was exhausted, but he would occasionally launch that left hook, and it was landing. But Yeah, if I get Wonder Boy on again, I'm gonna have to ask him about that because I was worried. I was waiting. I was worried Rory was gonna throw one of them out there, hit the right spot on the chin, and Wonder Boy go down because he fought such a masterful fight.
Yeah, a lot of people, ask the question about Rory McDonald and why he didn't pull the trigger. Why was he hesitant? Why was he tentative? And this all comes down to distance management. And that's the special gift that Stephen Wonderboy Thompson possesses, where if you enter into the box and you commit to a strike or a combination, there's a really good chance he's going to step off the center line and clean your clock. And Rory McDonald got tagged several times with counter strikes, and he couldn't close the distance. Also, he's reading how far away Wonderboy is, and he knows that if he's going to throw that strike, if it's going to maybe land or not, when Wonderboy keeps him so far on the outside, there's no point in chucking it. So he struggled with distance management. He was also 8 months removed from Robbie Lawler. He had Rory McDonald has his nose rebroken in training by his coach, one of his coaches, David Leah, and obviously rebroken again in that fight. So if that's in the back of your mind, that your nose is going to be potentially broken, it's going to be obstructing your breathing, it's going to be causing you all kinds of problems, that hurts you psychologically. That's not the reason he lost, but it's a factor. He couldn't pull the trigger, in my opinion, because Wonderboy Thompson is masterful with distancing, and I think that was ultimately why people thought it was hesitant or tentative, but really it was the chess match and that Wonderboy brings to the cage.
Well, absolutely, yeah, and that's what we spoke about when I spoke to him. How masterful he is at distance management, and even like his combinations. I mean, I was trying not to just totally mark out and just be like blowing smoke, but his strikes are so just masterfully put together. It was like Rembrandt. I mean, it's just like, it's so sweet. I mean, he's been doing it forever. He's been, obviously a professional kickboxer. And that's the other thing with him I, wonder and worry about. He's 30, I think 2 or 3, has had 2 reconstructive surgeries of the same knee. So it's like, that's another thing to wonder about him as well. No pun intended. It's his durability, here in the next few years, as not being necessarily the youngest guy in the world, on a knee that's been taken care of a couple times.
Yeah, that's a good point. In 30 plus, you're at risk of losing your skills. He's a very, very intelligent dude. And one of the other things about him that people, don't pay attention to is his fight IQ. And he's learned how to manage and maintain and treat his body. And he's been on record to talk about sparring at this point, not getting in there and going to war and killing himself in sparring sessions, because that's where fighters get broken down. It's not necessarily in the fight. It's going to war in the gym. So he limits the amount he's getting hit in practice. He saves that for the cage. And ultimately, that is going to strengthen and help his longevity in the career. There's been a lot of advancements in terms of how these fighters can take care of themselves. But at the end of the day, like you said, they hit a certain age, and it's different for every guy, and it's all over. And for him, we don't know when that's going to come. You're right, he's over 30. As of now, he's taking care of it. Let's hope he can get that gold belt around his waist before that happens, because I know you're a big fan too. Yeah,
he's and that's the other thing, kind of like the rankings we talked about. He kind of got skipped over because he's not running his mouth like Korner, and we even spoke about that, like how that element can get you skipped over, and he's just like, dude, this is just me, man. I can't. Me trying to be some WWE type thing is just going to be completely transparent. This is who I am. I mean, I do my talking in the ring type thing, which is cool. I mean, you just have to admire that. So, ultimately, I think he will get his shot. And that's obviously going to come here at the winner of the Tyrone Woodley, the ruthless Robbie Lawler 201 UFC this weekend. Mr. Kobe K, brother, we could go on for a hot minute, dude. We're going to have to do some of these like fight recaps or something like that when some of these big cards come up, man. You definitely know your stuff, bro.
Yeah, man, I'm down to chat with you whenever. I'm hoping to have you on Kobe's Corner soon. I've really enjoyed myself. But there's one question I have for you before we get out of there. We get out of here. I seen you in a picture holding a handgun. Apparently, you were on a show on Netflix, so I'm really interested to know what that was about.
That was Burn Notice, man. That was Season 5, Episode 9 of Burn Notice. I was on there. They don't even make it anymore, but it was a few years ago. Went down to Miami to shoot that episode. That particular still right there was a shot of me drawing down on the star of the show. Jeffrey Donovan, who is, I forget the star's name. His real name is Jeffrey Donovan, but in the show it's, I don't even know. Anyway, he had a hostage that was strapped full of C4, and I was debating whether I should shoot him, but if I shot him, I run the risk of leveling the whole block because of the C4. So very dramatic scene. It was cool, man. Very fun to go down there. Hung out with a good friend of mine who was also the star of the show, Kobe Bell. Yeah, man, I'm an actor, been in SAG for a while, so get to do some cool stuff like that every once in a while.
Well, make sure to send over your work anytime because I'd love to check it out.
Yeah, most definitely. And any social networking website, I know you got a lot going on, man. Shout that out so I can people can follow you.
Yeah, you can check me out on YouTube. Simply type Kobe K into your YouTube search engine, find my channel, check it out. If you don't like it, don't subscribe. But if you like the work, please subscribe. Very important that you do that. You can find me at www.kobescorner.com. My blog's there with all my picks. Twitter at Kobe519. Let's connect. Let's talk the fight game. I love to learn from my listeners too. I'm a learning sponge, forever evolving as an analyst.
Very cool, my man. Well, thank you so very much for taking the time and spreading some of your expertise. This has been Kobe K. He has a podcast called Kobe's Corner. Go check him out, ladies and gentlemen. And this has been me, Jeffrey Wilson. It's me speaking to you. Stay tuned. There will be more.